Hi there, I'm Katrina Perry. From the BBC World Service, this is The Global Story. Today, Brazil's endless flood. It's a story that has shocked this giant nation and sent a warning to our warming world. One of Brazil's richest regions, including a gleaming city, is still struggling with water a month after freakish storms. 3 months of rain fell in less than 2 weeks. It swept away homes, roads, bridges, factories and livestock, and more than 500,000 people have been displaced. President Lula is calling it a climate catastrophe. We'll wade into just what that means with our reporter who's met those who are being told their homes will never be rebuilt. We've got two people with us today who are really close to this global story. They're both with BBC Brazil, which serves audiences there in Portuguese. Daniel Gallas, hello, you're in London. Thanks for joining us on The Global Story. You are from the city at the heart of this crisis, Porto Alegre. How has it felt seeing your hometown submerged?
It was pretty horrible, pretty shocking because it happened very fast. We usually get the news here when we wake up, but I remember just overnight going to my cell phone and just reading the news because we knew something big was about to happen, but we didn't know quite how big this was going to be.
And when you woke up to those messages, what kind of things were your friends and family saying to you?
We heard stories of people having to flee their houses overnight. I had one close family member who left her house to an apartment building in the city of Canoas, which was heavily affected. And then it was 4 a.m. when the people in that apartment had to flee to Porto Alegre to a safer area. And they're still there, actually. It's been a month and they're still there. It's 15 people who left their houses, in the middle of the night. And a month later, they still haven't gone back to their houses.
And Leandro Prazeres, you're in the Brazilian capital, in Brasilia. You're not long back from the flood zone, and we'll get to your reporting in just a moment. But firstly, on a personal note, have you ever seen anything like this?
The comparison that I was making was between what I saw in Haiti just after the earthquake, 1 year after the earthquake. The impression that I had was that I was in an area that has been bombed. I was always talking to people who were in a very difficult situation. And the scenario was of complete destruction and people were completely lost.
Daniel, let's start from the beginning. Take us right back and give us a description, a physical description of your home state of Rio Grande do Sul.
We're talking about an area, firstly, that's heavily populated, densely populated. Like I said, it's more than 3 million people living around that urban area. So Porto Alegre was just this, normal city with a very beautiful riverside. Brazil is a tropical country, but this is below the tropical area, so it's all very balanced situation. This is a river area that's surrounded by small river islands, and the satellite images showed that all of these islands were submerged by water, and many of these islands actually had big, nice houses, but they also had entire cities. There was one city called Eldorado do Sul where everyone had to flee.
Gosh, and you're right, those satellite images are quite remarkable to look at. We know the forecast for rain began in late April. So walk us through the first stage of the crisis. What were those early rains like?
There was a lot of destruction right from the beginning. We saw images of bridges falling. There were problems with hydroelectric dams. And then the weather just kept on getting worse, and it got worse in Porto Alegre, and the water was just flowing down, first from the hills, then to Porto Alegre, and then to the south. So the same water was just causing destruction through all these areas. Recently, we've known that some parts like the stadium and the airport, the water finally came down and they found lots of fishes in those areas. So the whole airport became part of the river, and the airport's fairly far from the river, actually. And many of these neighborhoods, you're seeing fishes coming up because just they became part of the river. It's like a significant portion, some entire neighborhoods, they just became part of the river, and not just for a few weeks, for a whole month.
3 months of rain fell in 2 weeks. Leandro, you were sitting in Brasilia. How did Brazilians everywhere respond to this?
There was this huge wave of solidarity. There were people from different places, people even from different parts of the world, Brazilians elsewhere. But in Brazil, it was massive. Some rescue workers from Roraima, which is a northern state, who have to travel like 4,000 kilometers in order to help. They traveled, they crossed the country, and they went to southern Brazil to help the population there.
And of course, soccer, absolutely massive in Brazil. There was a charity football match as well to try and raise funds.
The rivalry between these two major football teams, Grêmio and Internacional, it's very famous. But they kind of like they forgot this rivalry. They organized football matches. They even unified a T-shirt, which is it was unimaginable like a few weeks ago. So basically, they were all united in order to help the population that was affected by these floods.
Of course, it wasn't just footballers. There were other athletes who got involved as well.
A gente vinha treinando e vinha com a ideia do sonho olímpico, com a qualificação. Só que depois de ver o decorrer dos dias, as situações que a gente estava enfrentando, todo o povo gaúcho está enfrentando, vendo nossos familiares, amigos, colegas, vendo a população necessitando, eu e o Evaldo conversamos bastante e tomamos essa decisão de optar por abrir mão do pré-olímpico e focar nossas energias aqui no Rio Grande do Sul, nosso estado, para ajudar nossas famílias e amigos.
O que me motiva até aqui é poder ajudar, não tem ajudar uma pessoa, resgatar uma pessoa. Isso que agora mais que nos motiva, que nos dá força, acho que é isso.
You spent 10 days on the ground. How hard was it to get there and to get around?
The main difficulty was that there were just no flights from Brasilia to Porto Alegre because the international airport was closed. The roads from Porto Alegre to different cities in the Rio Grande do Sul state, some of them were blocked and some of them are still blocked.
So there would have been the same difficulties trying to get aid there as well. Tell us about the people you met when you did arrive.
They felt lost because they had never seen something like that happening in their area.
I'm standing at one of the main improvised harbors that's being used by rescue workers to bring people to safety from flooded areas. From this port, the victims of this tragedy are taken to improvised shelters, many of them set up and staffed by volunteers. People have been expressing anger and some frustration as the situation continues. They complain that it's not clear to them when they will be able to resume their lives or even if they are going to be allowed to go back to their home.
It's one thing when you know that you have somewhere to go back, but it's a completely different story when you have the feeling that the place that you used to call home simply doesn't exist.
And as journalists, when we go to these places, we rely on people to tell us their story, but that is often very difficult for people to do. And I think that happened with you, didn't it, when some people were describing their situations?
We were talking about an old lady with his son. His son is unemployed. She relies on a very, very small pension. And she just had no, she was always saying that for her to be able to build this house, she had to starve. She had to save up a lot of money during her entire life. And then she said, well, it's all gone.
And the policy in some areas is that residents are to be discouraged from ever going back home.
In this particular area I'm talking about a neighborhood called Moinhos, and it's located in a city called Estrela. I talked to the authorities of Estrela, and they told us that they are not going to allow people to return there. So they are not going to resume the electric grid. They are not going to resume water supplies because they want to discourage people to return to these areas because they feel like this is now a very dangerous area for people to live, and they don't want to be responsible for any more damage caused to the population.
And Daniel, these policies are in line with recommendations from the government of the state of Rio Grande do Sul, aren't they?
It's a very difficult situation, and that's why I think the authorities now we have to actually rebuild the entire state, and that's the narrative that's coming from all governments.
E é por isso que nós garantimos, não apenas uma forma do cara voltar para casa. Nós vamos utilizar, e eu quero repetir aqui de viva voz, todas as pessoas que perderam a sua casa por conta dessa coisa que aconteceu aqui, vai ter o direito de ter uma casa.
So Brazil was already suffering, like all these countries, suffering with cost of living crisis and the post-pandemic economy. Now, on top of that, the authorities have to practically rebuild a state that accounts for 6% of the national economy. So it's a huge task ahead.
Two words have loomed over this story from the beginning: climate change. President Lula's government has called this a climate emergency. Lucas, our listener there in Brazil, wrote to us saying there is no doubt this scenario has to do with climate change. What's the evidence there? Well, Sarah Keith Lucas from the BBC Weather Team sent me a note.
Well, this part of southern Brazil is certainly no stranger to heavy rainfall. But what we know about these floods were that we had really active frontal systems that just got stuck across the region. So there was high pressure both to the north and the south, and that trapped rain-bearing weather fronts that would normally move through quite quickly. So in just 3 days, for instance, Porto Alegre received 2 months' worth of rainfall. This rain continued for around about 10 days. And of course, a lot of talk about climate change. And it's always difficult to say that climate change is directly responsible for a single weather event. But the World Weather Attribution Network have done a study, and they've concluded that these floods were made around twice as likely due to human-induced climate change, and more intense too.
Have these floods changed the way Brazilians think about or talk about climate change?
Climate change has always been a topic in Brazil, but in a different circumstance. Brazil is always seen as its great contribution to the world would be not to avoid deforestation and avoid causing more of these climate events. But Brazil is not known for suffering with these climate events. It has problems with massive poverty, inequality is huge. It has, violence, education problems, lack of access to health. And climate was just not in the list. And I think now it's made into the list because everyone's seen that this can actually undo everything else that you have in your life.
President Lula is someone who's been talking about climate change and the effects of climate change for quite a long time. At the beginning of his third mandate, climate change was a very common topic in his speeches. But on the other hand, some members of his cabinet were talking about oil exploration in areas near the Amazon, for example.
And when we're talking about preparedness and rescuing and readiness and recovery and so on, it brings to mind, for me anyway, New Orleans here in the US after Hurricane Katrina. The water stayed around for weeks. The rebuilding took years in parts of that city. Katrina became a byword for government incompetence. Daniel, this is the thing I find so shocking. It's taking so long for the water, for the floods to go away. What's going on there? I mean, presumably Porto Alegre had flood defences.
It had flood defences. A lot of them didn't work. Some of them didn't cope with that much water. Some of them just weren't planned for this much water. There were like problems afterwards with sewage system and pumps that were supposed to drain out the water from the city, and they were insufficient, or they broke down, and some of the neighborhoods that weren't even affected by the floods saw water coming out of the sewage because these technical problems. One thing that you mentioned that's been particularly difficult is just assessing the damage. The water just kept going up and down, and for more than a month it's just still there, and it seems like it has no place to go. And this is something that you can't really, on a human level, intervene, and just make the water go away.
If people still can't access their houses, is there any kind of plan locally to help them do that?
Some people want to desperately go back to their houses. Some people just want to leave the shelters. The shelters are not the best places to be, especially in long-term situations. And we've seen, classes are still suspended in a lot of schools and universities. The two big teams that we're talking about, football, which is a huge thing in that area, they won't be playing in Porto Alegre for the rest of the year because it's just not possible. The airport's going to be shut until late December. We know at least that the hospitals are functioning, but these crucial things, and also the non-crucial but the day-to-day things, they're just on standby for an indefinite period of time.
The whole of Brazil is watching how the government handles this and what happens next. How important is it that they get it right?
The whole population is worried about what happened there and how the government will deal with this crisis. So I think that it puts another level, another layer of pressure on his government.
And Daniel, for your family and friends, what is their outlook? How do they think, when will Porto Alegre get back on its feet?
There's a lot of anxiety and depression. People are just thinking of the task ahead of cleaning up and preparing for something like this to ever happen again. It's a very bleak outlook. I've never seen people so depressed as they are right now. Even if you get help from the government has a scheme where it gives you a bit of money and salary for a few months down the line. It might not support your business if you have to close down your business. It certainly won't, bring back your house, and you're going to have to think about living somewhere else. So it's huge questions and problems that people are going to have to face for the rest of their lives.
Indeed, a tremendously difficult road ahead, but we will look to both of you and your reporting to keep us informed on the months and years ahead. Daniel Gallas and Leandro Prazeres, thank you so much for joining us on The Global Story.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Katrina. It was a pleasure to be here with you.
And thanks to you for watching. If you want more episodes of The Global Story, you'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to us to make sure you never miss an episode. And please do tell us what you think in the comments below. Bye now.